Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran who cannot believe anyone would record to tape after the advent of digital recording, or else a scrappy upstart who can't believe anyone would record an album without using a digital tape machine plug-in, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of April 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Wilder who drove a Volkswagen Passat with a Mogwai bumper sticker, and who was always trying to sell you designer speed that was actually just bath salts. And old Wilder would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I'd like to say that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, over on YouTube. Head to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay, but that you just choose to pay because you dig the show, and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference for me. So thanks to everybody who's already taken the time to do that. If you're not in a place where you can contribute like that, there's still a few ways that you could help out for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could just tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I had a blast talking to Jeffrey for this conversation, and I hope you dig it. Our guest this week hails from Wisconsin and now makes his home off the beaten path in western Massachusetts. Jeffrey Foucault grew up in what sounds like an American pastoral setting, a background that would eventually find its way into the songs that fill the critically acclaimed albums he has spent the last 2 decades releasing. After a club owner in Wisconsin took a shine to his songs and set him up with some plum support slots for touring acts, Foucault was able to transcend his local confines and take his music national and international. He's shared the stage with and opened for a who's who of Americana music luminaries, including Greg Brown, Chris Smither, Dave Alvin, Alejandro Escovedo, Roseanne Cash, John Hiatt, John Hammond, Guy Clark, Kelly Jo Phelps, and Todd Snyder. He's also married to the fellow singer-songwriter and folk music stalwart, Chris Delmhorst. He is fiercely independent and has built a loyal audience the old-fashioned way, great records, and relentless touring. Uncut magazine has wryly noted that his musical style is the kind so many aspire to but never attain, beat-up troubadour folk whittled to dolorous perfection. NPR Music has called his music mesmerizing, meditative, alluring, and relatable all at once. And the New York Times has described his work as immaculately tailored. Sometimes his songs run right up to the edge of the grandiose and hold still, and that's when he's best, close to perfection. Jeffrey and I caught up on the phone last month, and I got to hear about his journey so far. Jeffrey Foucault, thank you so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. You were born in Wisconsin, and it sounds like you had a bit of a musical family, but the folks in your family, your parents to be specific, maybe they didn't see a way forward to have music be a career or something like that, so it was just something that they did around the house. What was music to you when you were a kid in that context?
That's a good question. It was interesting because it wasn't really like anything else that we did, in the sense that when my dad came home from work, he's, tired and, sort of worn out, maybe he'd come in and say hi to the dog and we'd have supper. And a lot of nights he would end up in the living room and he would grab a guitar out of the corner or he'd sit down at the piano and he would, he'd just play. And he had this way of playing that was really beautiful. Like he was, it sort of sounded like somebody trying to pick their way across uncertain frozen ice, like he was very tentative, especially with the piano, the way that he would put out chords. He was sort of trying to find his way. And so it almost sounded like, I don't know if you know the music of the French composer Eric Satie, but those early modernist, minimalist pieces, just very simple and sort of slow and quiet. And what it really was, I think, was the look on his face when he played and the look on my mom's face when she was sing. And sometimes, they'd play together, like maybe they'd play. When I was real small, I remember them doing a Gary Davis tune about Samson and Delilah at the kitchen table. And it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. They were just, Dad's really like banging on the guitar. My mom's really singing. And they had this look on their face that you just wouldn't see any other time. And I was curious, like they were almost different people when that happened. And that, I think, piqued my interest. Music was a separate category.
I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but I want to ask this question before I forget it. Now that you find yourself as a musician doing this for a living, do you find yourself playing around the house like that, around your family? Or is it now, since you do it for a living, that's not how you unwind at night?
It is... I do play every day, almost every day. I guess there's some days that if you're working on something, like outdoor project or something, maybe you don't have time. But, when I'm on the road, I play in the hotel and then I play backstage at the club. And music to me, like playing an instrument, I came to it late. I didn't pick it up until I was 17. And it has always felt to me like a story that you never come to the end of, and you're always interested to pick the book up. It's something that's always satisfying and interesting, and what you wish to be doing, as a player, perpetually recedes over the horizon. So I still play around the house. I still play in the kitchen sometimes while my wife Chris is making dinner or something, and I still make a point of playing. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I think she got a book and a song. That was the deal. Every night, book and a song until she was 5 or 6, and then she said, "Would it be okay if I read my own book?"
Yeah,
and then that totally. Whole deal kind of stopped. And the songs that were conversational for my dad and I, songs by John Prine or Gordon Lightfoot or Don Williams, things that we both knew how to play, and we could have complementary capo positions and just enjoy sitting around, the living room or whatever, playing together. And he was really like the only person I played with until I'd been playing for a number of years. I didn't play with bands. It wasn't like, I had a garage band or anything in Whitewater, Wisconsin. But I try to do that with my kid, and she has learned a bunch of tunes. She loves a couple Willie Nelson songs, and now she's on her own. She's off in her own thing. She stayed up to watch the Grammys last night, and she's obsessed with Billie Eilish and
sure.
All these other stuff. But the bedrock was still sit around and sing harmonies, on the old songs. Payday by John Hurt, or she always loved, and it was delightful to hear a small child sing it. She always loved Somebody Pick Up My Pieces, that Willie Nelson song. So when she was 3 or 4, there's a line about take me out of contention, and she liked that word. She always sang that line with like perfect gusto.
Definitely. So if you mentioned that you picked up the guitar around 17. What made you pick up the guitar then? Because, a lot of people have parents that play music or are into it, but don't take that route. What brought you to deciding that you wanted to do it yourself at that age?
My dad brought me home a guitar when I was like 8 or 9. Came home from work and had a guitar, gave it to me, and I liked the idea of it. And I think he'd noticed that I was always screwing around. He had this old Japanese mail order Conrad guitar, and it was kind of like it looked like a Gibson and Hummingbird, right, with little designs on the pick guard and stuff. And I was always detuning it or losing his thumb and finger picks in the sound hole, or he'd come home and it sounded like a maraca. And so I know he knew I was interested, but I'd had this bad experience where my folks signed me up for piano lessons and wouldn't take no for an answer. And I was already having trouble at school with some learning stuff, mostly numbers, math stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt to me like something that was like pretty well a native, something that I had facility with on my own, singing and whistling and making noise, and that I thought was beautiful and enjoyed. Now it started to feel a little bit like math class, because I was supposed to read chords and music and stuff with this very sweet old lady who could be a little bit sharp to sort of wrap you on the hands, a piano teacher. And I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't study my stuff, and then I'd get there and fake it and play it by ear, but she knew I was playing by ear, and it made her angry, I think, or at least mildly frustrated with me. And so I obstinately refused to do anything, and after a year they were like, why are we giving this woman money? And they let me quit. And it was that was a little bit touchy. And then he brought home this guitar, and I didn't want to sit still to have him get frustrated with me, because he doesn't have a lot of patience. I don't have a lot of patience, and between us there was not enough patience to make that work. So I picked it up again when I was about 14, and I learned 3 chords, but again, I didn't really stick to it. And then I picked up his guitar. That guitar I think he gave to some other kid because he figured somebody should be playing it. And I picked up his old guitar. And what happened was I was sitting there doing my homework at the kitchen table, or pretending to do my homework. And what I really was doing, I was listening to a bootleg cassette that a friend had given me, and it was REM and Billy Bragg at the Borderline in London playing like a pickup gig, little club in Soho, and they were like, drinking and carrying on, and they were doing a bunch of cover tunes. They did, Jackson, and Did You Ever See Dallas from a DC Night? And they did Hello in There by John Prine. And I was so captured by this one song. And my dad came home from work and he was like, what is that terrible thing you're listening to? And because, Michael Stipe and Billy Bragg are both interesting singers, but they're not necessarily instinctively melodic singers that are going to sound great in harmony. And although I thought, of course, that they did. And it was not up his alley, and he sort of sat down and disgustedly listened through Hello in There, and he said, that's a John Prine song. And I said, well, who's that? And he came home from work a night or two later with John Prine's first record for me, and something about it, it was so strange, and Prine had that ability to reconcile like deep pathos and sort of irreverent humor at the same time. And, to be heavy and be funny at the same time is a pretty tough gig, and he always managed to pull it off. Anyway, it was so compelling to me, and it was just a few chords, and I got my dad to show me, the 6 changes that I needed to get through Hello in There. And then I went from one song to the next, and that was it. It was my little private religion. I'd be sitting there in 11th grade chemistry, singing Sam Stone to myself, and knowing that, I was the only person who knew who John Prine was in my little class of 100 people. I didn't have anybody to talk to about that, so I was kind of off on my own little world.
That album that was the album of its generation that launched 1,000 songwriters. I feel like, because that was definitely, if there was going to be, just a handful. If I only had 3 albums to pick from to say this is what made me a songwriter, John Prine would certainly be, without a question, one of them. And I know so many other songwriters. It's interesting. There's not too many albums that appeal both to like a regular workaday listener and also to songwriters specifically on the same level. Because it's not exactly a songwriter's album, because everyone loves it who hears it, and yet it appeals so clearly to young songwriters.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting contradiction, and I think not only songwriters and like carpenters and stuff, but like like blue collar people. But, Ted Kooser, when he was the poet laureate of the United States, he invited John Prine to the White House and recognized him there. And I corresponded a little bit with Kooser around that time, because I had made a record of all John Prine songs. It was essentially it was like a side project that I did. It was really just a present for my dad. And then I ended up running out of money, and the label that I was working with at the time offered to print it up and put it out. Mm-hmm. And, Kooser, made a point of saying that John Prine was one of the most sophisticated writers he'd ever come across. And I think that's fair to say. But that thing where he operates at both levels, it's like looking through both ends of a telescope at the same time. It's just outrageously hard to do. He's such a talent.
I feel like that's something, God, I'm going to sound like a geezer when I say this, but I do feel like that's a little bit of something that's missing from more modern music, is the idea that a sense of humor can exist in something that's serious.
Uh-huh. Well, you can geezer out with me, man. I'm totally willing to go there. I did. I just had a conversation with my daughter between her online classes about the relative sort of overall batting average of, say, Lucinda Williams versus Billie Eilish. And it's not because I think Billie Eilish is not fantastic. She is. She's undeniably great, you know, and you sometimes, you know, put on something, you know, Hazel gets the DJ after supper or something, and we might have a quick, you know, dining room dance party while you're busting the dishes. And those songs, you know, you definitely, they're going to make you want to shake it. But that complexity and multi-level thing, you know, we're living in a time where, you know, grown-ups read kids' books and watch a lot of cartoons, right? So
You're damn right. Yeah.
There's a, you know, there's a fantastic book by Milan Kundera, the guy that wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Yeah.
There's another book called The Book of Laughter and Forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he was essentially an exile. He lived in Paris after the Prague Spring failed, and he was exiled from his native Czechoslovakia. And he, what it was called at the time, and he wrote this book, and it's a sort of twin critique of totalitarianism and capitalism. And the point of both of those systems, in his opinion, is to infantilize citizens, right? To make us all children, people, you know, incapable of either discrimination or memory. And it's a haunting book, and also a really lyrical, beautiful book. But I do certainly think about that book when I look around, and, you know, you're at how much time do you spend in the airport, like looking at what people are reading, and
yeah,
or just glancing about in the economy class at what folks decide to put on the screen that they're glued to while you're up at 35,000 feet. And it's not it's not inspiring a tremendous confidence in the body politic.
It's not. And man, I'll probably outrage many listeners to this show, because there's a lot of people that get outraged at this, but it's like, man, I'm just tired of hearing from people like what high art, like comic books are. You know what I mean? Or what they'd like rename it like graphic novels. And like, I have nothing against comic books. I have nothing against graphic novels, but stop freaking telling me that it's literature, man. Like, it's
Yeah.
not, you know? And that's fine. You don't have to read literature, but don't read a fucking comic book and tell me that you're reading John Steinbeck. You know what I mean? Because you're just not.
Yeah. I mean, I worked at a coffee shop, right? For a little while in college. I had, you know, I went to school at the University of Wisconsin, and I had a job working for the grounds department. And then before that, I had a job working for the motor pool, essentially like a big university like that's got 60,000 kids. They have their own car rental facility with 50, 75, 100 vehicles. You know, they're all white, and they're all parked at this one lot. And I would get up at like 4:30 and walk, because I didn't have a car or anything. And I get there, and it's like, you know, January in Wisconsin. It's not the coolest time to be out before sunrise. And I get there, and I put on this big mechanic jumpsuit, and I would, you know, just deal with the cars, do what the guys do at the rental car facility, right? Gas it up, top off the fluids, wash the windows, vacuum up the, you know, alternately Fritos, if it was like a professor taking a car to some sort of colloquium, or like barf if it was the hockey team, you know, going to a club tourney or whatever. And I would just get so tired of working outside, and my hands are raw, and I'm sleeping through classes. So I quit that job. I got this coffee job, and that was a really instructive job. I never had a service job, never learned how to count out change, doing that stuff. And there was this one cadre of folks who would come in sort of in the late morning, and they would always order the most complicated coffee beverages that were basically like giant ice cream cones. And what I realized was that these are people who really wanted to have an ice cream at 11:30 in the morning, and they couldn't rationalize it. So they order this, like, double chocolate macchiato, half calf, half soy concoction. And that's how it feels to me with the cartoons and all the stuff. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to watch cartoons if that's your bag. You just don't get to say that it's whatever, Tolstoy or something.
Yeah, and in fairness, maybe my proclivity to want to drink, bourbon that has a lot of names after it, like rye and single barrel and malt and this, that, and the other, is just because that's more acceptable to drink at 2:00 in the afternoon than old granddad is. So I guess we all have our justifications. So explain.
Well, that's the thing Steinbeck said, right? He said, that a version of adulthood was getting to the point where you didn't have to call your I can't remember. He didn't use the word temptations, but your essentially you didn't have to call your vices by other names when you got to a certain point.
I like that.
I like that idea.
No, that's really good, because that means I'm in my my late 30s now, and I feel like this is the age, mid to late 30s, is where you really have to figure out. You're like, all right, well, either this vice is going to eat me alive, or I'm going to learn how to make it part of an adult life. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's really true, and especially if you're a touring songwriter. And I don't know what your experience is with this, but everybody has either figured it out or got sober or died, right? Like, that sounds dark, but it's how it works. I remember the first time I made a record, and I was working with a bunch of guys that were a lot older than me, a band record, and I asked the producer, it's the night before the session, and I was like, so what should I lay in, like a couple bottles of this, or cases of beer, or a little bit of wine? Like, what? He was like, oh no, man. He's like, just bring coffee. He was like, all these guys got their drinking out of the way like 10 years ago.
It's so true, man. It's so true. Like, people either they can't handle it and they have to just completely go the sober thing, or they can't handle it and they are unable to go sober, so it goes one direction, or you're able to just be that old guy that just says, I'm kind of tired of waking up at 8 a.m. with a hangover every day, so what are we going to do about this? And you.
Yeah.
Jeffrey's path through life and path through the strange world of the music business has been singular, and that has been by design. When his classmates at university continued on the straight and narrow path, he found himself having a smoke and playing hooky. Why learn one way just because everyone else was doing it? When his career was first taking off, he eschewed signing with a label that would have taken away his masters or publishing in perpetuity. Why work one way just because everyone else was doing it? And now, as we stand squarely in the middle of a digital marketplace, streaming, social media, cost per click ad tracking, Jeffrey mostly just plays his guitar for hours each day. Why constantly tweet just because everyone else is doing it? In this sense, he's lived as an iconoclast out of a sense of sheer practicality. It seems like it was the only way he knew to stay a step ahead of the blues. There's a lovely poem by Charles Bukowski that speaks to this need to not conform to the parts of life that lack sufficient beauty. It's entitled, The Laughing Heart. Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. Be on the watch. There are ways out. There is light somewhere. It may not be much light, but it beats the darkness. Be on watch. The gods will offer you chances. Know them. Take them. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life sometimes. And the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you. Well, then explain to me how you ended up from gassing up cars and topping off fluids at a college to moving on into the music business, making a living playing music. Where did you get your start? How did you decide you were going to start doing that? What did that look like at the start for you?
The decision wasn't entirely conscious, I think. I'd gone to the university to get an education, and then I got halfway through and I had this good summer job where I was working outside, and I really felt really good, and I felt like I understood where I wanted to be and how I wanted to be. And there's a weird thing that happens in modern American life now that everybody goes to college instead of, some people going to, and when I say everybody, the vast majority of people are expected to get out of the high school and go right off to college. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it also creates this strange no man's land where people who are 18 to 22 and would have been certainly considered adults 50, 75, 100 years prior, live in this weird extended adolescence where it's kind of like you want to go on dates, but you don't have your driver's license and your mom has to take you on the dates. Like your parents are sending you money and you are going to school, but you're kind of not on the hook for doing much, which means what you're doing is like drinking, going to parties and learning the manners of your class. And obviously that gets into a whole other issue, but I looked around and I was like, this isn't for me. And I called my dad and said I was going to drop out, and he was like, oh boy, here we go. And he said, he was very sweet about it. And he said, how about your mom and I drive out to Madison and we'll take you out for supper and we'll talk about it. And I said, here's the deal. I want to get married to my girlfriend. I want to get a carpenter's apprenticeship, and I want to, start a family and be like a normal human being. This whole college thing just seems stupid. And he was like, all right. Sounds good to me. Yeah. So I dropped out and I started working on a fruit farm. And I think that was really what caused me to start writing was the break, the psychological break of stepping off the moving walkway that I'd been on, doing essentially what I was, if not told to do, certainly encouraged to do up until then. You go to elementary school, and then you go to junior high, and then you go to high school, and then somebody says, are you going to college? And you're like, I don't know. And they say, well, here's how we got to get you, applications. And I had a real nice teacher who was like, you're a pretty smart guy. We could probably get you into college. And so she helped me go to college, but I didn't know why I was there. So suddenly it seemed like a good idea to quit. But that moment that I stepped off, I went home to my folks' house, and everybody's at work and everybody else is at school. And I was sitting in the backyard and, smoking the illicit cigarette. And I was rereading Huckleberry Finn, which is funny how I think about it, but I was reading Huck Finn, and I looked around and I thought, everybody else is doing what they're supposed to do. And I am playing hooky. I just pulled one over on the whole world. And I thought to myself, I want to feel like this all the time from now on. And I didn't, but I remembered that moment, and I got this job on a farm. And when it was too wet to go in the fields, the boss would call and be like, don't bother coming in. And I would stay home and play guitar all day. And I started writing tunes, right? So when you first start, like being able to make a G chord is hard, and being able to do it and have the chord ring out and not mute at all or sound dumb is just deeply satisfying. If it's not, you'll never learn how to play. And then the next thing, you start stringing a few chords together, and then pretty soon you can play a song, and playing other people's songs for a while is really, really satisfying. And then suddenly it's less satisfying, and there's something in you that makes you want to write your own tune if that's in you to do. And so I did, and suddenly I had like a little handful of tunes. By the time I had decided to go back to college and finish up so I'd have a degree, there's, my relationship had sort of train wrecked, and I was working outside, and I started realizing how hard it would be to be doing manual labor when I was like 45 or 50. And I thought, I might want to just hedge my bets and get those last 2 years of college. So I went back, and I was still writing tunes that whole time. And I drove out to this little club called the Cafe Carp my last year of college, or maybe the second to last year, I don't know. But I drove out with a tape, and I gave it to Bill, the guy that owned the bar, and ran it with his partner Kitty. And he put me on a song swap. He said, you bring a few people, and these guys will bring a few people, and then you'll all have a nice little audience, and you can play your songs. And so I did that, and then he started putting me on to open for anybody that came around that he thought I should meet. So that was like, Greg Brown and Peter Mulvey, Chris Smither, Dave Moore, Bill Morrissey, all these people that I knew who they were, and they were on this little couch circuit, and it was hard to play in Madison where, there's a million college kids. They all have a band, and all their friends will come to the show for almost nothing and drink a lot of beer. It's hard to get a great music scene happening there. They have managed to do it, but at the time, certainly if you couldn't play for 400 people at the Barrymore, you better be able to play for 75 people in a little room like a Carp. So these people would divert and play a little show with the higher gate, know they could sell it out and have a good night. And Bill would put me on to open. And I started thinking, well, I guess I should make a record. Peter Mulvey and I opened a show for him. We stayed up half the night playing, trading songs. And he said, have you recorded any of this? And I said, no. And he was like, well, it's not that hard. You could make a record, and I'll help you if you want. And when the record was done, he gave it to his manager at the time, who was managing Chris Smither, and Smither heard it, and he liked it. And the gal who was doing publicity for them at the time liked it, and she wanted to get into management, and she got in touch, and she said, hey, do you want to come play a few shows on the East Coast? And, this is like 2001, and I'd never been east of Michigan. And I said, yeah, I would, I'd like to play some shows. And so she booked me a little tour, and it's just one of those things. One thing led to another. Pretty soon I had a manager, and she showed me how to write a press release when you're going on tour, and she made me get some headshots. Remember headshots?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Right? And to get the black and white glossies. And then I was on the road for, a little while. When I say on the road, I mean I would play anywhere, and I was still sub-teaching a little bit to pay the rent. And I mean, literally, like Girl Scout camp staff training, you bet. Like, you want me to be there? I'll be there. How much would you pay me? Like $150?
Right.
There was a couple gigs, more than one, where I borrowed $50 gas money from my brother, and $50 gas money from my mom, and drove 6 hours to Duluth, knowing that if anything happened to me and my truck didn't make it, which was a perfectly reasonable possibility, or any number of exigencies that could happen on the road, I just was going to be stuck because I didn't have any other money. I was spending the $100 to get up there, and if I didn't make it to the gig and get paid, there was no way to get home. And but things just got a little better every time, and that little record had some nice sort of word of mouth traction, and that was back, you and I probably got into the industry around the same time, and the old model was falling apart. Record labels were falling apart on the traditional model. The internet had flattened the landscape, so that people who were trying to work independently suddenly you could do it. You could create a mailing list. You could communicate directly with your people, and the technology that made it possible to make a digital recording, the gate for that went way, way down. If 10 years prior it was going to cost you $15,000 or something to make a record, now it's going to cost you, a couple $1,000s to make a pretty creditable sounding record.
Yeah.
And all those things got easier, but you still had some of the machinery left over of the major label industry. That model hadn't completely collapsed yet. Publicity was still publicity. You hired a publicist, there was a good chance they were going to get you some publicity. Mm-hmm. If you got hired to go work a show, the promoter, which has turned into sort of a quaint term, the promoter was in charge of promotion. There was no Facebook for you to exploit your relationships with your fans on behalf of a massive corporation like Facebook. That didn't happen, right? So the promoter had to get out there and shoe leather promotion. They were out there postering kiosks and making sure that the local storefronts had your poster, and then you do it. They'd schedule an interview with the local press and all that stuff. So all that stuff still kind of worked. I could trade on those things and still at the same time trade on a lot of the metrics that were new, right, for the indie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a trip. I feel like now you mentioned that at that time, around the turn of the century, that is when, the gate kind of dropped for people to be able to record and publish their music to a certain threshold. And I feel like in the intervening 20 years, it's dropped another amount where it's now so easy to record and publish music to Spotify that it might have hit a threshold now where all we will see going forward is sort of like a regional and micro celebrity, almost like let's say you're at a high school and a couple of the kids in the high school put out a really self-referential record about stuff that's going on in their high school, and that's what people in that region will listen to. It's going to be really interesting to see where all this goes, because you can, buy a really cheap DAW for a computer and a couple good plugins, and you're pretty much there at this point. You can make something that sounds like a professional record. So I have no idea where any of this is going, but my point is, I think it has changed now one more time since the change that you were describing there 20 years ago.
Right. You went from the sort of needle in the haystack to the needle in the stack of needles.
Yeah.
And, Billy Conway, who I've traveled with for about, 10 years or so, and beautiful, beautiful drummer who used to play in Morphine and before that Treater, right? He's come up with a concept he calls Kickstopper, which is where you raise money to stop people from making albums. And I think that's probably where we should go with it. Go with this whole deal. He came up in the Boston scene. Mm-hmm. When there was, and this is before the 1996 Telecom Act that got rid of all the rules against vertical integration in a given market, right? Meaning that we had rules about whether somebody could own the radio station, the television station, the newspaper, all the stuff in the same market, because there was a very reasonable fear that people would get bad information. Well, when that went away, it was impossible for small, local, low wattage radio stations to play local bands, which meant, and you see this, it goes, it's like the trophic cascade in an ecosystem, right? Like now the local rag has nothing to write about because nobody can get, it was nothing to have a great song, have it played hard on the radio in Boston, and be able to take your band and play a room with 500 or 750 people in it.
Yeah. And
if you could do that, right, now you're getting the scouts from the major labels who are thinking, well, maybe this band has this sort of credibility and durability. Maybe we just get rid of the ugly bass player and make some minor corporate maneuvers here. We could have a really saleable commodity. But at the time, if you can't do that, like if the radio station goes away, how do you get people to come out to your thing? If you can't get people to come out to your thing, there's nothing for the local paper to write about. So those little papers, 10, 15 years ago when you were on tour, every little town you went to and every mid-sized city had the local rag that was full of advertisements and stuff for all the local businesses. But it was also where, you'd open it up and find out who else was playing that night. Because maybe by the time you got done with your coffee and cookies, 7:30 p.m. folk show, you could go out and see like rock and roll band somewhere. Right. And, when that goes away, then all those little businesses that benefited from 750 people being gathered in one room, people that need to eat and have a couple of drinks and all those things, like those people, it redounds all the way through the system, and it's bad for everybody. So it's funny to consider your proposition that we've gone from the ability to leverage a scalable national fame to a version of hyper-local fame that seems almost twee or useless.
Yes.
Right? I don't know where it goes, because you want it to be local, like small and local is where it's at. And yet, when it gets so local that it becomes essentially atomized, you're not doing anybody any good.
Well, no, because
everybody's alone in their room.
Yes, and also at that point, I mean, you just hit a point at a certain point with revenue where if a person's not making a certain amount of money, you can't continue to devote time to continue doing the project. And if it has become atomized, you use the word atomized there, which I think is a perfect description of it. If it's become atomized like that, and you don't have like this, I mean, artists will work for damn cheap. You and I both knew that. I'll work for damn cheap because I just want to do this gig. You know what I mean? But I think it's even getting past the point now for a lot of artists, especially artists starting out that don't have a thing going on, where I look at some kids that are 24, 25 years old, and it's like they're not even getting paid $150 to go out and play a gig. So if you're not getting paid $150 for the gig, where's the gas for the van? Where's the money for the one Motel 6 room? It's I think we'll see where it goes from here. I don't know where it will go. I just know that it's going, or that it's already gone. So
yeah, no, there's a recent very good book. I just did an interview with a guy named William Derezowitz, who for an article that I think is going to come out in Harper's in the next month or two. But he wrote a book called The Death of the Artist, and it's a very legible, common sense critique of what the digital economy does to the creative classes. And Jaron Lanier has written about this really eloquently in a couple of books. One of them called "You Are Not a Gadget," and the other one called "Who Owns the Future." And those are different sort of techno philosophical books, where I would say the Derezowitz book is slightly more cultural, looking at what does it mean if the people who make the art can't make the art. And not only that, but you're looking at a model, right? You're looking at the canaries in the coal mine, because if you have 5 or 7 massive corporations whose only real valor is in their ability to build the biggest, fastest server, right? The one that can aggregate information in real time and apply to that information algorithms and predictive analyses that are going to allow them to make bets about risk and reward in the market. What you have is these huge corporations that are essentially the arbiters of who gets paid. And what they do is insulate themselves from risk. If you're looking at the economy, at any given moment, the economy writ large is going to have a finite amount of risk and a finite amount of reward. And if you are able to run the big server, and you're looking at everybody's information, which they surrender to you in the end user agreement that they didn't read, and that their congressman didn't have the guts to legislate against, what you're going to have is basically these corporations listen to the baseball game the night before, and they make bets about who's going to win. And you place your bet in good faith, and you end up with all the risk, and all of the reward is irrigated to the very, very top tier. You're looking at if you want to express it as a graph, you're looking at a graph that stays low, 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 and then shoots real high on the far right hand, sort of hockey stick graph.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it in the music business, right? Of course, we know that very few people are making a great deal of money. If you want to look just at, pick a thing, streaming, for example, mm-hmm. right? If the revenue from streaming is allocated at 3 decimal places from a penny, only the people who are able to create massive scale, right. Which is available because everybody's connected now globally, but only those people are really going to be able to make money. And my music last year on Spotify alone was streamed for 30 years, like 30 years of streaming mm-hmm. happened last year, just at my goofy little record. And, I got paid for that, but I didn't get paid an amount that would keep me above the poverty level if it was my only income.
Sure.
And that should be worrisome to everybody, because what we're doing is we're making decisions about who gets paid and what they get paid. And the big corporations are saying these decisions about who gets paid and what they get paid, they're a technological artifact. This is just one of the things we have to live with, to have all this amazing reach and this paradise of accessibility. And it's not true. The decisions they're making are technologically fungible. The decisions they're making are deterministic. They're not deterministic. What's the word I'm looking for? They're political philosophical decisions masquerading as a sort of technological determinism. They're not. It's not like the rules of the road are written by the technology. They're written by the people controlling the technology, and we're all going along with it. And our legislators are going along with it. You see, now we got going. I better slow down.
It's interesting. I wonder though, was it an artifact of technology for 30 or 40 years? Let's say from like 1985 to present. That people in the middle class creatively could make a dedicated living with creative work, because before that, unless you were someone who was a savant or a genius or the most successful in the world, you were the guy that was the baker in your town that could play guitar. You were the woman who was the seamstress who could write a song like Happy Birthday or something like that, So
yeah.
Is it actually more common in human history for creative? My point is, I think the idea that it's really hard to monetize creativity is almost like a human universal, and it's more common to not be able to monetize creativity than it is common to be able to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a sad and very salient point. And, Adam Gopnik wrote a thing recently that I read in the New Yorker where he was making the point that, the terms of a fully flowering democracy are rare and
right.
Worth protecting. But if you're looking at the history of human political organization, it's much more likely that you're dealing with strongmen and and classes and all the things that we've sort of taught ourselves to believe that we're no longer subject to. I think that's true. What I wonder about we look at the music business in its heyday, right? So say you have like the dawn of recording technology, and then the beginnings of the music industry per se. People print up records, identify people they can sell them to, and then create an economy of scale around that market. And then it hits sort of an apotheosis in the post-war, where you have a baby boomer generation that for the first time isn't working, and has a certain amount of disposable income because of the way the economy works. It's a pretty, we lived through a thing that worked. That doesn't mean that people weren't getting hosed all the time, and that the music industry wasn't a sort of cutthroat, feudalistic deal, right? Like that was all still going on. And it's up in the air. I think you're right. You know, whether or not we happen to live through not only the time where it was going to be possible for us to do work like this and to be fairly treated, that may be, but also the time where people listen to music the way that we listen to it, from its organization in the given format of the album to the idea that you would treat an album like a piece of literature, that you would sit down and pay attention to it, where, you know, if you're looking at human history for all the other thousands of years, music was pretty much used for like dancing, religious ceremonies, you know, getting married. It was the thing that happened more or less in the background, unless it became ritualistic and formalized, you know, classical music, that sort of thing.
Well,
I don't know. I don't have an answer about that. I just know it pisses me off.
Well, but I think the one catch with what you just said there, you said, you know, it was used for all those different, it was used for dancing, it was used for, you know, kind of in the background, but you also mentioned that it was used for religious purposes. And I think that that's the catch right there, because I think even as we become a less formally, even as we become an irreligious people, as modern people in America and in the Western world, there is no denying that human beings innately have a religious desire of some kind, a desire to connect with something larger than themselves. I would personally call that God, but not everybody does. And so I do think that music is going to be able to retain a place, whether you play it formally within the church or whether you play it just in a role that works as, for people, ersatz religion. You know what I mean? Like there's still a hole to fill there for people. Basically what I'm saying, the drugs that we're selling, we still got people that like to get high. You know what I mean? So I think we're going to be all right.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And it's always, you know, it's worth remembering that when the Rolling Stones showed up to Chess Records to, you know, to see the hallowed ground, the dude that was standing up on the ladder painting the wall was Muddy Waters.
Muddy Waters,
right?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like most of the people, you know, most of the music that I listen to is made by people who've been dead for a while, honestly. And a lot of them, they didn't get to just spend all day getting good at what they do.
Yep.
They had jobs and they had other stuff that they were worried about. And they were, of course, it made the work richer to have lived a life and to have, you know, had children and lost them, had partners and lost them, to be worried, be worried about making enough money. I do, you know, I think at the end of this plague year, as we watch the ranks of people who are able to pull it off, not only doing this, but keeping the club open, booking a tour, you know, all those things, we're going to see some losses of places to play and people to do it. And I'm ambivalent about whether or not in the long run that's going to be for better or worse. I mean, certainly it was, parts of it were sort of bloated, like you said. You know, it's the fact that everybody's nephew can make a hip record and put it on Spotify. It definitely makes it a little bit more complex. Right?
So what do you, I mean, both as an artist and as a guy that's got to, you know, leave the cave and hit an animal over the head and bring some meat back to the cave, as a businessman, you know, like, how are you envisioning your next act as a songwriter? Like, how are you going to navigate everything that we're talking about here?
Well, I think about that. My shorthand for it when I was a youngster was I looked at guys like Greg Brown and Chris Smither, and guys who could seem like they were mostly playing for about 200 people a night. And I opened enough shows for guys at that level where I knew what the economics were. It's like, well, if you can be out, that's a real good living. And, you know, you don't have to be so famous that people are harassing you in airport restrooms or anything, but you're, you know, you're satisfied with the knowledge that, there's a certain level of recognition for what you do. And you have a certain number of people who are paying attention and care about it. And my idea was, you just go to the town, you try to get everywhere, like once a year, and other places maybe once every other year, and hope that every time you come back, there's like one or two more people, right? Or that everybody that saw you last time thought it was good enough that they want to bring a friend. And I went through a number of years working that way and sort of believing it to be so. And I think that idea still mostly holds true. You know, if you're a person who makes art for a living, and I was deeply reluctant to even use that word. Growing up in the Midwest, it seemed pretty precious to talk about being a songwriter as like art. I thought of it more like being if you were a carpenter and you were going to make a table, you want to make a really good table. You want to make sure all the legs are the same length, and that was about as far as I was willing to take it. But the only thing you control is how good you are at what you do, right? Like you better get it sorted out on your end before you try to leave the house and get people to to pay to watch you. And Billy, who I was talking about before, when he was in Boston, he got invited a couple times to give the working musician lecture at the Berklee School of Music. And he would always give a variation on the same talk, and I've heard him give it to people on the road. And it's essentially a triangle, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be good at what you do. You have to be lucky, and you have to work really hard. And some version of that triangle is what's gonna make it possible for you to get by and make a living. And the trick is to not get upset when you work really hard and you're really good at what you do, but you aren't particularly lucky. It doesn't really go anywhere for you. But you watch people who have the other legs of the triangle and in spades, right? Like you watch somebody who's not particularly good at what they do and is not working very hard get lucky, and you watch somebody, the point is you can't watch somebody else and measure your own life by that thing. It has to be enough for you to be good at what you do and to work really hard. And if it's, and to go out there, and if those two things aren't satisfying, if the luck doesn't come through for you, there's not much to say. It's got to be enough before you even left the house, before anybody ever called your name and said that you were somehow talented or touched in some way. It's got to be just enough to do your own thing. And I think when I look forward, when I try to see how it's going to go, it doesn't have to be all music all the time. I sure would like to cut my footprint down, so I'm not flying all the time, going out for 2 weeks a month, spring and fall, just burning jet fuel to make rent. I would love to tour less, but go on longer trips and see if I can find a way to do that in a more fuel efficient way. I still want to play. I still want to go out and see people, and I like to be out long enough. I don't know about you, but I really have a hard time being out longer shorter than like a week. 3 or 4 nights in is where you just start to feel like you can play, and really, about 2 weeks and change playing every night is where I start to get a little bit crispy, but I'm pretty happy. Like I like it that way. Yeah. And so I like to be out. I like to be out for a while and be playing every night. I'd rather be working. And if that means I can go out and do it, I guess I'm going to find out. I'm interested in a lot of other stuff. I like to write. I've been writing poems for a long time. Someday I'd like to have a book of poems out, although of course that's not like a that's not a hot shit way to make money, really, as far as I know. But
yeah, I was about to
what
say,
I
man,
think
as
is,
far as making money goes, I don't know that getting out of the music business and into the poetry business is quite the way to go, brother.
right? I got a plan. No, I don't. You know, my feeling is it's going to be. I think it's going to be okay, as long as you're making work that you're excited about, and as long as you retain the joy that you felt when you were a kid and you woke up on a Saturday and it's like a sunny day and, you know, you're just raring to go. I want to feel like that all the time. And the only time I get sad or, you know, frightened about my personal deal is when I feel some attrition in that joy and the, you know, in my curiosity about the world. You know, I don't want to get to the place where I feel jaded, and I don't want to get to the place where I'm no longer interested to work. As long as I'm interested to work, I figure, you know, it's gonna take care of itself.
As long as you still feel like the college student smoking a joint and reading Huck Finn playing hooky, you'll be good to go.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't smoking a joint.
Okay, well, a regular cigarette. Fair enough.
Yeah, I was smoking a straight up cigarette. I don't think I even tried pot until I was on the road. One of my first long tours, and a buddy of mine, we were in California somewhere, staying at somebody's house, you know, the whole deal. And there's a joint going around. The guitar player who I was out with, he's like, look, man, I know you never tried smoking grass, and I just want to say, if you were going to try it, you should try it right now.
That's a great line.
And I was like, all right, cool, I'm in. And you know, and that was cool. I had a real good time. But yeah, no, growing up in Wisconsin, I think the kids like after me started to pick it up. But you know, we pretty much like sat around in the woods, drinking liquor that we'd pilfered from various family liquor cabinets. You know.
That's a very Wisconsin thing. I just imagine you as a Wisconsinite out in California smoking your first joint and desperate to eat a burger from Culver's.
Yeah, that's not far off.
One of those butter burgers.
I still do like to get a butter burger every once in a while.
I mess with those. Well, man, this was great to get to talk to you, man. I hope we get to do this in real life sometime over a beer or two. I'd love to hang sometime, brother.
I would too. It's really a pleasure, and I want to say I made a point of listening to a bunch of these before we did it, and you're really good at this, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you, man. Well, thanks for being a part of the show, and I'll be in touch soon, man.
Okay, you take care.
You too. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Jeffrey Foucault's latest album is entitled Dead Stock, Uncollected Recordings 2005 to 2020. Available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.